You're first, right?
Good evening, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to this side event of the International Climate Initiative, Paving the Way for Climate Action at Scale, IKI's Contribution 2022. My name is Frauke Röser from New Climate Institute. We are a think tank and one of the implementers of the IKI. This event here is jointly hosted by the 3 German ministries that together implement the International Climate Initiative. That's the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, the Federal Foreign Office, and the Ministry of the Environment. And considering just the context of this event, considering the significant emissions gap that we are still facing, also considering the frightening developments and climate impacts we can feel in many parts of the world, and the rapidly closing window for action that we have, it is very important now to have decisive action on climate change, climate mitigation, and adaptation, and to really see implementation at scale. And the IKI has been a long-standing, I think, partner in development cooperation and supporting climate action in many parts of the world. And we wanted to reflect here tonight with you, with the implementing partners, the partners of the IKI, what the role of the IKI can be in this context, and in particular together with its many partners. But before we have a panel discussion, but before we move to the panel, we will hear from the 3 ministries that together implement the IKI, starting first with Mr. Steffen Wenzel, who is the State Secretary from the Ministry of Economics and Climate Action. Mr. Wenzel, the floor is yours.
Thanks for introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, dear IKI partners and friends, dear Jennifer and Ilka Hirt. It's a great pleasure and privilege to welcome all of you to this year's IKI High-level event on this evening. Let me begin with a couple of words regarding Germany and our own efforts to scale and speed up climate action at home. In generally, but particularly in this very challenging time. First and foremost, I would like to emphasize that Germany stays committed to its climate targets and international commitments. Currently, we need to introduce short-term measures to ensure our energy security that do not reflect our climate ambition. The reason is the Russian war against Ukraine. But, and that is important, we do at the same time introduce policies that will significantly speed up our energy transition and will ensure that we meet our climate targets in the mid and long term. We want to get rid of fossil fuels faster than originally planned, and the European Union too. We stay committed to contribute our fair share to each 1.5 degrees, and with that to the EU NDC 2030 targets and our national targets to reach 80% of renewable power and coal phase out by 2030 and greenhouse gas neutrality by the year of 2045. And of course, beyond our own efforts to decarbonize and reach GHG neutrality already in 2045, we stay committed to our international commitments to support emerging and developing countries by providing climate finance. The International Climate Initiative, IKI, is a central part of Germany's international commitments to fund climate and biodiversity action in our partner countries. As you probably are aware, there have been some changes for the IKI. IKI, now being a joint climate finance instrument of the Ministry of Economics and Climate Action, the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like to emphasize that this is really a great opportunity, an opportunity for the German government to mainstream international climate finance and action along ministries and along different formats of international cooperation. Each ministry will now contribute its own expertise to the IKI. My Ministry of Economics Affairs and Climate Action will particularly focus on bringing in expertise and provide funding for efforts regarding mitigation, particularly in the areas of climate policies, energy transition, the decarbonization of industry, as well as mobilizing and cooperating with the private sector. Despite these chances, it was clear from the beginning that we want to ensure that IKI remains IKI and that we build on the strengths and instruments we established since the year 2008. And I have to say, for a good reason. Already after just some days at the COP, it is striking to see how many panels IKI is part of, bringing in experiences, ideas, and kick-starting discussions. IKI is a truly remarkable and unique instrument in the ever-changing climate finance landscape. With its high diversity of implementers and partners all over the world, IKI drives innovation, new approaches, and ambition. With its integrative approach bringing together climate action and protection of biodiversity. It's a very, very important item. And with its well-established format with partners, countries, and close political relations, IKI aims to support priorities and demands for our partner governments. Core element of the IKI, of course, is a variety of competitive calls inviting implementing organizations to hand in their ideas for climate and biodiversity projects in emerging and developing countries. Therefore, I'm particularly glad that we have launched 3 competitive calls this year in order to address the current challenges in climate action and biodiversity conservation on different levels. First and foremost, the IKI thematic call is a flagship initiative of the IKI which was launched just last week. With the thematic call, we are providing an additional funding of 280 million euro for 12 thematic priorities reaching from mitigation to resilience and biodiversity. We are looking for innovative and impactful projects which can be funded with 8 to 20 million euros. The priorities follow recent research and do reflect the thematic priorities of the German government and the needs of our partner countries. We aim to support the shift away from coal, oil, gas, and hence NDC implementation via sector coupling and the mobilization of climate investment and action on biodiversity. And I believe this can't be highlighted enough. IKI remains being one of the few integrated funding programs, addressing together mitigation and resilience, as well as preserving biodiversity and the decrease of deforestation, promoting integrated approaches and addressing the interlinked global crisis together is and remain in the core of IKI. To ensure transformative effects of the projects, this should be conceptualized and later implemented by international consortia, as this has proven to produce the most successful and sustainable structures. To maximize the sustainability of our projects, 50% of the funding is to be implemented by local organizations, strengthening local structures and actors. I believe that makes the thematic calls unique. This cooperative approach is also reflected in the IKI Medium Grants call that focuses on civil society actors who jointly implement projects. The IKI Medium Grants funding program aims to support a partnership on equal footing between the project implements organization of the Global South and North. This year particularly focusing on empowering youth-led initiatives and the collaboration with the private sector. Let me end by highlighting one core idea that is reflecting in all our IKI calls regardless of the thematic or regional focus: funding, size and implementer. We need cooperation and collaboration to develop the most impactful and creative concepts. We will only tackle the climate crisis by building on joint approaches that incorporate the strengths and the ideas of different actors. We are very much looking forward to working with all you together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wenzel. I would now like to invite State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Policy of the Federal Foreign Office, Ms. Jennifer Morgan, to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here not only as the State Secretary, but also as someone who is a bit of an alumna of IKI. One of the first things I did when I joined WRI was forged a partnership with IKI. At the time, it was trying to build capacity and think through the whole measuring, reporting, verification issue, which was a tricky one. And, you know, IKI I found to be innovative, ready to think through things, help out with partner countries, and fund local groups in order to achieve our goals. So I'm very thrilled to be here today to share with you two of the calls that we're publicizing today. But first, you know, I think we have two priorities. I think these words really encompass what Germany together is working towards, and Stefan outlined quite a lot of that. And it's great that we're working together across the three ministries as well. I think very exciting because it really draws in the expertise of each of the ministries. And I think, you know, this has been one of the main pillars of our climate foreign policy, moving forward and forging partnerships. And I think it's really proven to be quite an ambitious and successful program to support innovative concepts. And also, I know we've learned quite a lot from our partners and delivery organizations along the way. So what I'm happy to do is today is announce two of our theme calls. Our first one comes from our very deep commitment to work with the most vulnerable countries. My first trip as Special Envoy was to go to Bangladesh and to meet with the local communities there that are experiencing loss and damage every single day, having been hit by cyclones. And so our first call is indeed around strengthening the resilience of in this case, the Pacific Island states against climate-related loss and damage. The Pacific Island states are a very important partner for Germany, and thus we've decided that this first thematic priority will focus under the lead of the Federal Foreign Office on working with them. And I think we know how critical the situation is for small island states and the damage that is being caused by extreme weather events. I know my minister, we were in Palau as well. She made an early trip to Palau to also, I think, one of the first German ministers in Palau to actually experience and speak to people on the ground of what's happening there. So we need to support those communities to minimize the impact of the crisis on their lives and help them deal with the damage that has been done and is in some way, and sometimes irreversible. So this will be a call, it's a multi-year call, one of the great things of IKI, up to 8-year projects, and up to 20 million for this call, 4 projects coming from Pacific Island states to support them in building their resilience on loss and damage. So that's our first call, which I'm very thrilled to share. The second one is also, I think, quite exciting because it's our small grants program. And that, you know, we actually doubled it this time because there was so much interest, because it really we know that we can't tackle this climate crisis or adapt to it or deal with loss and damage without an active civil society. We know that all across the world. And so the IKI small grants projects are really trying to encourage a whole of society approach. And the last time we did these calls, we had more than 1,500 organizations apply. And that's why we decided, okay, we need to step this up to 11 million euros, also, multi-year. But it's key. These are critical change agents. And so that's why we're very excited from the Federal Foreign Office to focus on those. And we're looking forward to ideas, creative ideas, how we can move forward on this transformation. And from the 30th of November onwards, organizations are invited to submit their proposals, and I can't wait to see what comes in. So thanks so much for being here, and look forward to listening to our panel.
Thank you, Jennifer. And last but not least, Ms. Ilka Hirt, who is Deputy Director General, for International Policy of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, in short. Much longer name.
Thank you so much. Stefan, Jennifer, it's an honor for me to be here, also with the whole IKI family, dear ladies and gentlemen. We just arrived on time for this important event, and I want to prove that our new whole of government approach does not only lead to very long speeches, one line after the other, but that we really get synergies from this new approach. So I want to highlight the reason why we're working so close together, and I'm already experiencing that this pooling of expertise that you were talking about, Jennifer, and that Stefan was talking about is really happening, and it's a lot of fun working together and getting our different points of views together in one funding instrument, which makes it even richer, I think. So the Federal Ministry for the Environment, where the IKI was born in 2008, is now a partner with the Climate Ministry and the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And we do focus our IKI activities mainly on the protection and conservation of biodiversity, which is a very important topic. Seeing the biodiversity crisis that we have and that we think is just as important as the climate crisis we are facing. And we think we can only solve the two in an integrated manner. They do reinforce themselves, but I think if we find solutions, we can only find them in an integrated manner. And we also have a strong focus on adaptation now, together with your ministry, Jennifer. And last but not least, of course, the carbon sinks. So those are our three areas of expertise, and I think they are very important. But let me also highlight one third crisis. It's not good to speak too much about crises, but I think we cannot forget this one. It's the pollution crisis. And this is also one field where the Ministry of Environment really has a strong expertise: circular economy, resource efficiency. We're talking about the Plastics Convention, the negotiations we're having here, but also the Chemicals Conference ahead of us next year. And I think this is the third field that also needs to be looked into by IKI. This year's thematic calls really, I think, show the very wide and broad range of topics that can bring solutions to the climate crisis. And this is why we have quite a broad field of topics that you can find. So we have freshwater resources on Pacific Islands, and we wanted to strengthen also your focus on Pacific Islands. And we have a lot of biodiversity projects that we're looking forward to get proposals to. And thirdly, we also have one project that focuses on resource efficiency, as I said. So we're looking forward to proposals, to discussions with you, and to continue working with our partners from the other ministries, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the speakers for sharing some more details on this new IKI call and the diversity of topics. We now move to the second part of the session, which is our panel discussion, where we want to reflect a bit more from the different perspectives of the panelists, from civil society, development finance institutions, philanthropy, the private sector on scaled up climate action, and then also linking up to the IKI and how that collaboration might work. So I would like to invite the four panelists now to join me here on the stage. First of all, Mr. Ambroise Fayol, who is the Vice President of the European Investment Bank. And there was a name. Oh, take this.
It helps the person to arrive.
Then please, Mrs. Anna Toni, who is the Executive Director of the Institute of Climate and Society. I'm not going to pronounce it in Portuguese.
Perfect.
No, yeah, exactly. And then Ms. Sourabi Menon, who is the Vice President of Global Intelligence at Climate Works Foundation. And then our fourth panelist, Mrs. Ritumetsi Molotsuane, who's the head of Environment and Society at the National Business Initiative in South Africa. So as I said in this first round of questions that I will put to all of you, I would like to reflect a little bit more on on scaled up climate action and how you see that from your perspectives. And Anna, I would like to start with you. I think partly because Brazil brought some good news, I think, to the climate community. The incoming President Lula has said Brazil is back on the map of international climate policy and will reassume its leadership role in international climate action and fight against climate change. And I would like to hear from you your reflections on that, how you see that, what your expectations are, and what that might mean for global climate action.
Yes, I think Brazil has brought in the issues of climate change and biodiversity. We have been bringing bad news for the international community for the last 4 years. And finally, hopefully, soon we'll be able to bring some good news. We were super happy that with the new elections, we just finalized, and it was very, very close. We have a president that is absolutely committed to climate. He has, throughout of his campaign, discussed climate change, discussed and been committed to fighting deforestation, who has now been absolutely terrible in the last 4 years. In his, just after the results that we got on Sunday, last Sunday, the first thing he did was a big speech, 15 minutes speech, and dedicated 3 minutes for issues of climate change and biodiversity and forests. So we as the Brazilian civil society community are now very happy and very committed to working with the government on that. It's important also to remind us, Lula is not a new president. Lula has been a president for 2 terms before, and under his government, deforestation went down 78% for the period he was in place. So it's not somebody that is just talking about. He knows how to do it. He knows that he has the tools. And I think the signal he's giving, Lula is coming to the COP on the 16th. So he'll be here with us. His government starts just in January. So it's a bit awkward because we have Bolsonaro as the president, and obviously represented officially at the COP, but Lula will be here with us. And I think this is a super important signal to the international community, which is Brazil is back. Brazil really is committed to fighting climate change, deforestation especially, working with traditional people, indigenous people. And I think he is, by coming here, I think he's giving 2 signs. One is, yes, Brazil wants to be part of this global community of that commitment. And also, Brazil will need help. to do that together with countries like Germany that has been part of what has been achieved in the past. We had a wonderful partnership with the German government for years, and I think the type of partnership, it did pay out. So I think we are very, very happy, hopeful that we spent the last 4 years resisting. That is the truth. I think the international community, together with civil society, the state governments and the Congress and others have been resisting further damaging. But in the last 4 years, our deforestation has gone up to the same levels of 2005, which is terrible. It's 72% above what was 4 years ago. And I think we share the same goals. And I think Lula is coming with a lot of go and willingness, and I think he will find the support of the international community, of Brazilian civil society, and now we need to get concrete. I think implementation is what he has in his mind, and I think for a person like Lula, which is a person dedicated to South-South collaboration and fighting hunger is a key issue, fighting inequality is a big issue. He has understood that climate is an accelerator of poverty. And poverty is what now brings him to climate. And I think this bringing resilience, adaptation, biodiversity is what is going to bring Lula to the space that he is. So I'm on the moon. Everybody's like in Brazil. We will have a big party. So we're all invited to see Lula when he comes on the 16th.
Thank you very much, Anna, and for these optimistic and positive introductory words to the panel. I would now like to move to Mr. Fayol, to the European Investment Bank as an MDB, and hear your thoughts and perspectives on where you see your role as EIB and your priorities, perhaps, in scaling up immediate climate action and supporting that.
So things have changed, and thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. For the group of the multilateral development banks, there are good news in what we see as a strong increase in the volume of activity that we do for climate. We have just published what we call the MDB Finance Climate Report. It is for the group of 11 MDBs showing what they do for especially low and middle income countries and between adaptation and mitigation. And it shows that in 2021, we have financed more than 60 billion euros for climate action in low and middle income countries. And that is more or less 2/3, 1/3 adaptation mitigation. And if you include high income countries, the MDBs have financed more than 80 billion euros of projects. So, and this is compared to 60 last year. So this is something where you see targets everywhere actually to increase the share of what you do for finance. At EIB, the Bank of the European Union, we have decided to double the share of what we are going to finance for climate and environment from 25% to 50% by 2025. And we are a big bank, so it means big volumes also. And in terms of adaptation, because here it is a COP of adaptation, we have decided to triple the share of what we do for adaptation in the climate finance that we do. So it's clear that there is an increase in EIB, in other partners, also in other public finance institutions. The development banks in all countries, you see also this big increase in volume. So to me, that's the good news. Where we need to be more vigilant is how can we, as public institutions, crowding in the private investors, because the needs are so huge that we will need private investors to be there. So what are the structures that can be the most effective? And this is probably where IKI is extremely important. And also we need to, I like that really what you said about, let's not forget about, it's not only about climate, it's also about nature, biodiversity. There is a COP in Montreal in 2 weeks, that is the COP 15. the prospect is less positive than here, I would say. So let's make sure that we keep nature and biodiversity as big as a target as climate.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much for these thoughts and reflections. I would now like to move to South Africa. Everybody has been watching the Just Energy Transition Partnership in South Africa. It's set up to be a role model for other countries. I would like to hear from you, and apologies that I mispronounce your name again. Read to Metzi. I practiced it and I failed. Like to hear from you your thoughts as a representative of the private sector, where you see the role of the private sector in the implementation and taking forward the just energy transition in South Africa.
Thanks. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me clearly. I think while the Just Energy Transition Partnership itself is such a key moment in the work that we've been doing from a business perspective, we've looked at the transition more broadly. And it's really in support of this commitment that we've been driving from a business perspective that we would like to see South Africa achieve net zero by 2050. And as part of that kind of thinking and the work we've done, I think has touched on several dimensions. The one extremely important part was providing a platform for leadership. This is an extremely important part, I think, also reflected in some of the comments that you've made about Brazil. It's not just government leadership, but you also need business to be playing an active role, and I think adding to the impetus as well as the kind of confidence that's required to actually commit, to show the ambition, and we've seen that through our NDC. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in South Africa, so the energy component is a fair part of it. But through the work that we've been doing on the Just Transition Pathways with business, we established a platform of over 30 CEOs representing key sectors across the South African economy, from the national utility, petrochemicals to finance, and a range of other sectors. So one, demonstrating very clearly that the business leadership and consideration of how we actually transition, so understanding at a decadal scale what interventions need to be put in place has been critical to the work that we've done. I think the other part where we've often not done such a good job as a country is being able to detail what it is that we've wanted, So we've been able to build a fact base that is accepted, that is internalized by a range of stakeholders. We use the business conversation to anchor, this envisioning of a net zero by 2050 future for the South African economy, but we brought in a whole range of other stakeholders to think very clearly and in quite a lot of detail about what that actually means. And we did a sector by sector view of those pathways till 2050. So I think these two elements of bringing in a very visible, very clear leadership component where business is communicating, I think, to other peers within the business sector, but to government, to other stakeholders, that we are part of this transition, has been absolutely critical. It's helped us as a country to shift our ambition in our NDC, but it's also started the mobilization process that we need to see from companies internally in how they are positioned and how they operate. But I think very importantly, understanding the South African context. What activities, what action does business play to make sure that the transition is just? How do we make sure that we're able to capacitate ourselves as a developmental state? It's not just a government imperative, but you need to have very specific expertise embedded in the whole delivery mechanism. This has been a critical part of the conversations that we're having, and this is something that will become even more important now that we've submitted our investment plan, just to start in this transition, but really being able to demonstrate the thinking that's inspired ambition and confidence, and that will lead to action is something that is really, really crucial going forward.
Yes, thank you for these thoughts. Now, moving to philanthropy, Surabi, the philanthropic sector is kind of stepping up on climate action and funding more and more climate activities. What role do you see going forward for philanthropy to accelerate implementation and climate action on the ground?
So thank you for the question. I just wanted to share the report we released 2 weeks ago, which looked at the amount of money that exists in philanthropy. So we see that it is stepping up. Indeed, 2021 compared to 2020, there was a 25% increase in philanthropic giving to climate mitigation. But of the whole, if you look at the full amount, 2021, it was over 800 billion. 810 billion was the amount coming from philanthropy, individuals, foundations, institutes. Of that, just 7.5 to 12.5 goes to climate mitigation. So it's less than 2%. So that headlines is something we've been producing for the last 3 years, and those numbers have stayed the same. So what we see is, I think it's very clear from the IKI presentations where you're looking at integration of different aspects: biodiversity, adaptation, mitigation. Anna made the point of climate could be an accelerator for poverty. So what we see is the intersectionality with other causes that philanthropy puts money to: education, food, human health services, resilience, all of helping build resilient communities. So all of that will be impacted by climate, and therefore we need to see more integration within philanthropy from the amount of money that is there, which is not going to help support climate. So climate work, some of our work is there to help mobilize philanthropy, and Anna's ICS in Brazil is an important partner in that network where we do work with many countries. Now, coming to the second question of or this question that you had on where can philanthropy step up in its action, let's just take the example of clean energy. You made the point the private sector needs to come in. If you take clean energy in the advanced economies, 97% of the investment comes from the private sector. But if you look at all of the emerging economies, let's take Africa, we are in Africa, it's just 14%. So it's just not there. And that's where we have to think of the barriers, and a big barrier is the cost of capital. And especially in this era where inflation is so high, that is going to continue to be a big handicap. And therefore, I think we in philanthropy can be looking at different ways to help speed up that transition that we need to see in trying to bring in the private and the public sector. So just 3 examples where philanthropy can play a role, and we are trying to do that. We had a great meeting in Cape Town in September with the African Climate Foundation and the President's Climate Commission, thinking of the JETP. So from that, three areas is how do we de-risk? Philanthropy is non-profit, right? So we can put in the capital, we don't expect returns. We say that, but we don't do it. We don't have good examples, and so we need to have more philanthropy stepping in to provide that kind of de-risking capital to help with projects that need upfront capital. The length of time for which you build projects is going to be difficult now because of the supply chain, so it takes longer. So you need to be helping support that. And then there are a lot of what is the environment in terms of the government, the policies, what is the risk profile for the country. So philanthropy can help a little bit in doing that. And we were lucky last year, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet was launched with philanthropic funding, which is looking to mobilize and leverage MDB money as well, because you need all of us to be acting together. Then the second example I wanted to bring up is in terms of the just transition aspect, which is so important. And this is where it will look very different in different countries. And the number of people that need to be transitioned are going to look very different when you think of just the energy transition side. So thinking through how is philanthropy helping support that transition? Is it job? Is it helping workers retire? Is it helping them get retrained? How are we working with labor unions? We just don't do enough. We track philanthropic funding, and we know we do not work enough with the labor unions. And you need that because people are part of that integration. And then the last thing I would say is there needs to be a top-down, a government. Government needs to be strong. And that's why JETP was remarkable. It was a South Africa-led initiative. Then the international funder group came in. But it needs to be driven by the country, but there's also the bottom-up process so that the inputs from all the stakeholders who are going to be part of that transition are included. And that's sort of the soft part of the transition, and that's where philanthropic resources are useful because we work with civil society and can help with other funding that goes from the government or bilateral side. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Surabhi. And speaking of integrated approaches, collaborating and partners coming together, I wanted kind of in a second round reflect a little bit more on how you see the interaction specifically with IKI and what the International Climate Initiative, how you see this collaboration or what IKI can do to leverage your activities. And maybe starting again, Anna, with you, in the context of Brazil, you already mentioned the partnership that Brazil and Germany had, and that also incoming President Lula, is looking for support. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on concrete options or opportunities for collaboration or support needs?
I think we have a list, a list of, because it has been on the pipeline. But I think, IKI has been already a very, very important tool for Brazilian institutions. It has had a lot of collaboration and it's been extremely helpful. It's important also, I wanted to mention the Amazon Fund. The Amazon Fund, which is also now led by Brazil for the Amazon, has money from Norway and from Germany, who has been a very important tool to create capacity on the ground to fight for the things and preserve biodiversity. So I think as an instrument, in our top list is obviously go back to the Amazon Fund that has been stopped for the last 4 years and have that good collaboration. But when we presented the next wiki projects, I was really happy to hear first this synergy among the ministries. I think that synergy is really important and will also help our countries, in the case of Brazil, to also work in synergy, because we know that governments have difficulties of working in synergies. And I think by having this example from Germany, that you're already working in synergy, will help first also the Brazilian government. One part that, I don't know if you have a ministry of more social types of projects, but obviously for a country like Brazil, thinking about the social challenges related to jobs, as Surabhi mentioned, hunger, those will be key. So it will not be enough just to talk to the environmental minister, to the economic minister, foreign affairs minister. We will need to involve the social ministers as well, because they will be absolutely key, especially with a Lula government. But you also mentioned that a very large part, if it was not mistaken, Jennifer mentioned 50% of the money is going to local organizations. I think this is really important, because I think one problem that we have in the South is the infrastructure to create projects, monitor projects, be able to make the machine going. And many times that lacks in the South. And the only way to create that in Brazil will be this the local organization funds that I think IKI is going to be putting money, and the small grants. I think that will make a big difference, because I think we are in Brazil in a mindset of we need to show to real people that climate is real and that they can benefit from a low carbon economy. So we need to bring real projects to subnational governments, cities and governors, that people get jobs and they will be able to have better food. If we don't do that, if we are not able to translate what we are talking here about to real people on the ground, and I think, again, going back to Lula, he has that very clear. I think we will not only lose the next elections in all the different countries in the world, but we will lose the climate battle. So I think one of the big jobs that all of us that works on philanthropy and and funding project is making that climate change is real for people. And I think that's a big challenge. It's a really big challenge. So jobs will be key for, I think, in terms of our list of priorities of wiki projects. Subnational and jobs, I think, will be the two areas linking to adaptation and biodiversity. That's where I would put my 2 cents.
Thank you, Anna. Mr. Foyol, the EIB has partnered with IKI to implement projects, no? And reflecting on this experience you've had as the EIB, where do you see IKI's biggest impact, and what approaches would you foster?
Well, for us, the cooperation and the partnership with IKI, and in particular the IKI Fund, is extremely important. And actually IKI, as well as the cooperation we have with GIZ, has become really something that is helping us develop more projects, having more impact, and being more relevant, basically. And I will take 2 examples of the projects that we finance through IKI. One is everything that is related to something that is extremely important, which is how you manage urban development. And especially how you manage urban development at an early stage. How do you get in contact with municipalities to organize? I mean, this is very complex. And you have energy policy, you have water policy, you have the wastewater, you have the transport policy. Everything has to be dealt with, and that is where we have found a structure. This is for an early stage the GAP Fund that we've done with the World Bank. We have also Felicity that is extremely interesting for a bit later stage, where IKI also has been extremely helpful to help us develop, also broaden the geography. Now we are moving in Felicity in Central Asia and Ukraine, for example. That is really an initiative that to me helps deal with an issue that is key for including here in Africa. For reaching the targets on climate, which is dealing with the climate in cities. And the second one is an initiative that we have launched last year, which is called MCAF, which is a fund of funds that has been created with, I was talking about how can we bring the private sector in. We're trying to leverage that with Allianz, and with KfW using IKI funds. And this is extremely interesting because it is a fund of funds to finance funds, especially in Africa, that are that are going to help with climate either mitigation or adaptation. We have launched that 1 year ago. We have already financed the first, actually it's Allianz that manages it mostly. The first fund that is in East Africa, it's an adaptation fund to deal, it's called ARCH. It is to cool the food or even the vaccines, things like that. So that is something that is extremely promising. And we are going to also to have pretty soon, actually hopefully next week, the next one, which is called Alcazar, which is in the Middle East and more on mitigation. These are very concrete examples how we can move together to have more impact, more leverage, more financing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Working together with IKI. Moving again back to South Africa. I mean, we said it before. No, the JETP South Africa is hailed as a role model for other countries to be replicated in other countries. And do you have any specific reflections on how the IKI, for example, could support that in that process in South Africa, but perhaps more broadly, in particular, again reflecting on the important role that the private sector has and how to leverage their capacities.
I mean, I think there is a project, an IKI project that we're about to start implementing, hopefully in the next few months. But I think it speaks to something that's really important, and it's related to the energy component of the transition. Much of the focus around the transition is quite regionalized. So we're looking at an area of South Africa called Mpumalanga, where most of our coal-fired power stations are located, and where, in addition to this huge shift that we're seeing from a technology perspective, there's obviously a large degree of issues around your labor force, but also the broader impacts on the community, issues around dislocation, diversification of the economy, and so forth. So this is a piece of work where I think very much focusing on these broader elements of the just transition. We need to make it quite real, that in terms of inclusion, in terms of enabling the kind of prosperity that we've pointed to very much in signaling what the green economy can bring to the country, these areas of inclusion, our ability to address some of the issues around poverty, inequality, but also building up skills. So all of that is a huge part of what needs to be done now. And from our perspective specifically is really noting some of the challenges that we're seeing, particularly in the public sector, from a capacity perspective, ability to deliver. How do we bring in the private sector, companies that are, part of those locations, part of those localities, and therefore can contribute their own time, their expertise, but working with, for example, municipalities, but other actors as well to help make those projects happen, and showing their degree of investment. So that's a very practical piece of work that we're doing, trying to align this national macro vision with a very localized impact, a very localized understanding and addressing of issues that are occurring in that particular region. And I think this is going to be something really important going forward. One, being able to understand what transitions mean at a more local level, because those jurisdictions also have levers, they have responsibilities, they have duties, but I think also they have resources that can be pulled into the mix, and working with other stakeholders to get the relevant interpretation of what a transition means for that region, for that area. We've started also work within the Western Cape doing something similar, but really linking the private sector to government in terms of envisioning what that particular area can look like, but also bringing in opportunities to build skills, to bring in more of your marginalized economies in the regions who perhaps have not participated in your formal economy, but really trying to build the platforms that bring in that part of our society as well, so that the transition is something that is felt, that people can benefit from, at a whole range of scales. So this for me, I think, is probably what will make or break South Africa's ability to transition, being able to demonstrate that shifting away from economic activities that are well understood. They may have their limitations, but they're well understood and they support jobs, they support livelihoods, is not something that is going to decimate communities, but in how we're able to manage and coordinate those shifts, to coordinate the stakeholders as well, you can actually allow everybody to be able to benefit. So this is something that is really, really, I think, critical for us as a country, just given some of the dynamics and the complexities of what the transition actually looks like. So, looking forward to increased degrees of support in that area going forward. And maybe just also to speak to the fact that South Africa is a very exposed country when it comes to climate change. I mean, we're a global warming hotspot. We have existing issues around water security, a high degree of land degradation, but we also have quite unique biodiversity in general. So the ability to focus with the same level of intensity on the adaptation and resilience story, and again still bringing in very much the community aspect, is something that is really, really critical. We haven't quite caught up with the speed of the mitigation change and the conversations that we're seeing. And I hope in the near future, that kind of a conversation, the degree of intensity, the degree of the investment, the resource investment to really unpack what resilience means and to localize it, is something that I look forward to greater IKI support on going forward.
Thank you. lots of challenges, and yes, and we need lots of collective action to make it a success. Now in South Africa, but obviously also in all other parts of the world. And then Surabi, just you already mentioned the kind of how a philanthropic support plays into other activities on climate action. I was just wondering, do you have any reflecting on IKI and the diverse set of action areas that the IKI focuses on? Any particular areas or focus areas where you can see philanthropic money and the Climate Works Foundation in that sense collaborating?
So thank you. Yes, I think we've had a few collaborations already with IKI through the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency and through Climate Transparency, other projects. And there's an interesting blend of what we can put in and what we support, and where government money comes in and what it does. So I think I think it's great IKI is looking at the integration, because you do need that intersectionality of different causes. But there are probably because we need to really speed up the scale of implementation and the transition, we have to think through maybe few places where there isn't a market. So the private sector is not coming in, and public money and philanthropic money can help a little bit to create the conditions that can then bring in and crowd in the private sector investments. And if you think of where the market doesn't quite exist, I mean, there are plenty of interventions, but thinking of the retirement of fossil assets, that's one. How do you reduce methane from upstream emissions? There's no market for it. It's not going to go away. It's a short-lived pollutant. It will have a useful impact in reducing the rate of temperature. And then maybe because Brazil has come back, it will help. But in terms of deforestation-free supply chain for commodities, we haven't succeeded in creating the market to incentivize that. And you're seeing huge fallback in terms of the carbon protection of the carbon sink. And, so there are different areas where I think a mix of government plus philanthropic capital can help create the conditions, which is, making sure elections are about climate. We saw it worked in Brazil. It worked in the US too. We just had our midterms too. And all the House seats or the Senate seats where energy was an important component, that did sail through. So it wasn't, for once, I think climate was not an issue in the US elections. So having the advocacy, building the momentum, creating technical capacity, building capacity in countries, we spoke about Brazil, South Africa, creating it so that when government policies or regulations are put in place, there is a decent environment setting which indicates strong signals in terms of stability so that the private sector can come in. So we've got to be creating the market to speed up, look at tipping points to speed up interventions, and then think through how soft money and government money can together help create conditions to crowd in the private sector with solutions that are ready to go. I think JETP was a great example with the plan being implemented now by the government. Finally, I think South Africa is able to get climate loans at better interest rates from Germany itself. I think that was announced a couple of days ago. So these are all good progress, and I think we need to be more targeted.
Thank you. I don't think we have a lot of time left, but I would still allow some questions from all of you from the audience, maybe up to 3 questions. And there's a microphone available.
Coming through.
Thank you very much. My name is Karabo Mohale. I'm from South Africa. I just wanted to ask a question about the just transition, especially when you look at the economic benefit that coal has in certain economies. So how do we de-risk some of these countries from withdrawing from the use of coal to try and ensure that that gap in terms of the economic benefit that is there in terms of the contribution to the GDP is not actually felt. More so because when you're looking at coal, I come from South Africa, we've got quite a number of mining communities, especially in one of the provinces called Mpumalanga. You're going to have, a situation where many people who work in mines, become jobless. That impacts on their economic conditions and their social settings in terms of high rates of unemployment, increased poverty and inequality. So how do we de-risk countries and as well as the adverse impact that the disinvestment in coal is going to have in some of these areas? Thank you.
Difficult question on the just transition. Who would like to respond?
Yeah, I can
Thank you.
attempt. Sorry. I mean, I think in the work that we did, in the pathways work, what we've emphasized and what was the driver for that work is that there are, huge global changes that are occurring. In the case of South Africa, we take on that change. We don't necessarily drive it, but we take it on. And so in such a situation, the best thing you can do is to be informed, is to be prepared, and is to be proactive in how you manage the situation. So that's the first thing. So almost taking charge and understanding that there are implications that are often beyond our control as a country, but that will still land on our doorstep and that we will have to manage them. And ignoring it doesn't help. But being able to understand perhaps the dynamics, over what time frame, what are the channels through which this change is being delivered, has empowered us to be able to start the conversations with other countries, with areas of support, has empowered us to be able to look within ourselves, what are the opportunities, how can we mobilize, what are the conversations you need to have, and really to be prepared and proactive in responding to some of the change that we see, and hopefully starting to then, in the future, shape that kind of world that we want to see. So I think for me that's been the biggest lesson that I think South Africa has taken on board. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's going to be simple. But if we don't coordinate, if you don't put in place a whole range of actions that you need that will be supporting whether you're reskilling people, whether you're training people, how are you supporting broader value chains? Do you need to bring in other mechanisms that may be more of a social safety net? All of those things need to be managed in a very deliberate and purposeful way. So ignoring it is not going to help. Can you change everything? No, you can't. But you can be empowered to take action to mitigate some of the negative impacts that we can already foresee, plan for it, mobilize for it, but also then prepare for some of those big opportunities that we can reap as a country. And that if we manage that properly, we're able to either transfer or use some of those benefits to support where we've been unable to kind of dampen the risk any further.
Thank you. Mr. Fayol, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, very briefly. If I can add the perspective of an institution that is financing 1 billion euro in the Just Energy Transition program for South Africa. I would say, your question is absolutely key. It's essential that we manage to finance the just transition in South Africa. And I would say that there are probably two ways to work on this, and they are very clearly elaborated in the investment program that the South African government has presented recently. One is how you do. You spoke about the coal miners, and it's true. It's something we have also seen in other geographies. How do you deal with the coal miners when the coals are closed? So there is a big part of the issue that is program that's going to be how do you upskill, how do you reskill the workers? How do you make sure that they are not going to be, as you say, just jobless, that they are going to find other opportunities? And that is difficult, that is essential. And the second thing is, how do you create, with this Just Transition program, opportunities elsewhere that will create jobs? And for example, we are working with companies in South Africa that are active in developing ports, transports. That's going to be much cleaner than than just having the coal miners. Loves me. So that's also a way. How can we develop investment that will create jobs? But that has to be at the heart of the answer to decarbonization in South Africa.
Thank you. I don't know. I think we have time for. No, it moved to me that fly for for another question. I saw hand in the middle.
Thank you.
Katja.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Katja Eisbrenner. I'm with Guidehouse. We're implementing several IKI projects. And I have a question for the panel on technology. I think we see a huge movement on the technology and also with startups, but the implementation of new technology also takes time. It's part of the transformation. I would be happy to hear your thoughts on transformation, the role of technology, and maybe even digitalization. Thanks a lot.
Let's go. Okay, maybe I can take it. I think that's really important, and that's what we hear in a lot of countries. It's about technical assistance, technical capacity, and that is a major barrier to getting things moving. So so in terms of where a lot of that technical transfer comes through government-to-government work, there's a little bit of philanthropic work in helping build up the innovation. So if you think of technology in the S-curve, where is that point in the S-curve where you really have to look into supporting that shift and then letting the private sector come in when it starts scaling up. We've seen a little bit of that, right? It took 20 years for the renewable energy cost parity to come through. We're seeing a little bit of that shift pushing, if we can keep pushing for transport electrification. And a lot of that money now is coming through. Where is the money needed? It's to build up the infrastructure, the charging stations. So it's interesting, there is this Bloomberg Philanthropies, Goldman and ADB have a climate innovation hub. Very interesting. It was sort of announced last year. They've just announced some early funding that they've done, projects in India and Vietnam looking at the charging infrastructure, looking at what does it take. So it's a little bit of money. It's not that much. It's not in the billions. We're always hearing billions, but this is in the millions. A little bit of that is useful enough to start that little jump start the process. And once you start that, then you can start creating the condition. People are interested, and then they would come. But it takes specialized innovation funds, and it is blended capital that is helping create that. So having more of those, I think, can help us.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because, I mean, at COP, we used to hear a lot about technology transfer, and that's gone somehow. Unfortunately, it has not been like a key issue. We talk a lot about finance, but no longer about technology transfer. In the case in Brazil, we do support a lot of networks of startups, and obviously startups that are related to climate solutions. And I think mixing the support of startups with the climate lens, rather than just creating new startups just for climate, but just the opposite, bringing climate to the startups that are already there, this is something that we are actually doing. One area that we are now supporting very keenly, and I think, I'm sure IKI is going to receive a lot of projects from Brazil on that, is on the bioeconomy side. We do need a lot of new technology for the bioeconomy, especially for the Amazon, because now there is this new economy, the nature-based solution, bioeconomy, that will need a lot of technology, and we feel that's absolutely key for the solutions in the Amazon. And we have very little resources as yet going to that.
Can I just say one word?
Yes,
because
sure.
I would like to thank you for the question, which allows me to say innovation is certainly very important, and it is completely linked to climate and to SDGs. And thank you, because IKI is very active in innovation, green hydrogen, for example, and that's something that we very much welcome.
Thank you. I was going to close, but if it's a very quick question, then the gentleman, yes.
Thank you, and thank the panelists for all the wonderful presentations. I'm Harrison from Cameroon. I just want to find out, we just talked about technology now, and my worry at times is how do we, what the program is thinking about blending this technology with indigenous knowledge, because we're talking climate, but the real people that have to manage that forest or have to manage the sea and landscapes are the community people. So what's the program really doing to make sure that all these big programs get right down there to the community people who are actually living with or living around these ecosystems? Thank you.
Maybe the IKI group.
If it is a question to the IKI program, then I would invite you to exchange with the representatives of the IKI over drink after this session. But if there is a commentary from one of the panelists on...
I mean, this is absolutely key. In our case, obviously, traditional people are the ones that have been saving the Amazon for so long. So I think one of the initiatives that we're supporting is putting the knowledge of traditional people together with the knowledge from scientists and others for them to work together. And that is working really well. And there are now universities that bring indigenous people to teach at the universities because they have so much knowledge. There is no bioeconomy without indigenous knowledge, and obviously they need to be part of that solution. There's no other way. They're the savers there. I think that's
And this is a nice way to close it, I think, with these words. I think there were more questions, and I would invite you to exchange further over a drink, which I think the drinks are ready here. I'd like to thank the panelists for their perspectives, for their insights, and for sharing those, and also for the many ideas. I think there are many opportunities for collaboration and much needed implementation and decisive climate action now. Thanks a lot, and thanks also to the IKI.
Thank you.